The anesthesiologist's voice was the last thing I heard before everything went dark. Count backwards from 10, Mrs. Caldwell. When I woke up 12 hours later, I had no idea that my own daughter had already changed the locks to my house and moved all my belongings to the curb. What she didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd made some very specific changes to my will, changes that were about to turn her world upside down. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Margaret Caldwell, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at me. I was wrong. The trouble started 6 months ago, when my daughter Bethany moved back into my house in Riverside, California. She was 38, recently divorced, and claimed she needed somewhere to stay while she got back on her feet. Being the loving mother I've always been, I welcomed her with open arms. My late husband, Robert, had left us a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Street, complete with a wraparound porch and a garden I'd spent 20 years perfecting. The house was easily worth $800,000 in today's market, and I figured there was plenty of room for both of us. At first, things seemed normal enough. Bethany helped with groceries, occasionally cooked dinner, and we'd watch our evening shows together. But slowly, I began noticing changes in her behavior that made me uncomfortable. She started inviting friends over without asking. Friends who looked more like drifters than respectable people. They'd drink beer on my porch until late hours, leaving bottles scattered across my carefully maintained flower beds. When I politely asked Bethany to keep the gathering smaller and quieter, she exploded. "This is temporary, Mom. I'm not going to live like a prisoner in your museum." The way she said "your museum" stung more than I wanted to admit. This wasn't a museum. This was the home Robert and I had built together, filled with memories of 43 years of marriage. The real problems started when Bethany began bringing home a man named Derek Hoffman. Derek was 42, unemployed, and had this unsettling habit of walking through my house like he owned it. He'd help himself to food from my refrigerator without asking, leave wet towels on my antique furniture, and smoke cigarettes on my enclosed porch despite my clear rule about no smoking indoors. "Derek's having a rough patch," Bethany explained, when I expressed my concerns. "He just needs somewhere to crash for a few weeks until his workers' compensation comes through." Those few weeks turned into 2 months, and Derek's presence in my home became increasingly problematic. I'd come downstairs in the morning to find Derek passed out on my living room couch, empty whiskey bottles on my coffee table next to cigarette burns that definitely hadn't been there the day before. My neighbors, the Hendersons, started giving me concerned looks when they saw Derek working on some beat-up motorcycle in my driveway, tools and oil stains spreading across the concrete. The breaking point came when I discovered Derek had been going through my personal belongings. I found him in Robert's old study one Tuesday afternoon, rifling through the desk drawers where I kept important documents. He had the audacity to claim he was looking for a pen, but I could see bank statements scattered across the desk surface. "Bethany, he needs to leave," I told my daughter that evening. "I've been patient, but this has gone too far. This is my home, and I won't have strangers going through my private papers." Bethany's response shocked me to my core. "Maybe the problem isn't Derek, Mom. Maybe the problem is that you're a controlling old woman who can't stand seeing other people happy. Dad's been dead for 3 years. It's time you stopped living in the past and started appreciating the people who are actually here for you." The cruelty of her words left me speechless. Robert's death had been the most devastating loss of my life, and for Bethany to throw it in my face felt like a physical blow. But what came next was even worse. "Besides," she continued, "Derek and I have been talking. This house is way too big for one person. You're getting older, Mom. You probably shouldn't be living alone anyway. Maybe it's time to think about downsizing to one of those nice senior communities." I realized then that Bethany hadn't moved home to reconnect with her mother or to get back on her feet. She'd moved home because she wanted my house, the house Robert and I had worked our entire lives to pay for, the house where I'd raised her, where every room held precious memories of the family we'd built together. That night, I lay awake, thinking about everything that had happened. Bethany had always been somewhat self-centered, even as a child, but I'd attributed it to normal teenage behavior that she'd eventually outgrow. She hadn't outgrown it. If anything, her sense of entitlement had only gotten worse with age. I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Robert before he passed away. He'd been worried about Bethany's financial irresponsibility and her tendency to expect others to solve her problems. "Margaret," he'd said, "promise me you won't let her take advantage of your kind heart. She needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet." At the time, I'd thought he was being overly harsh. Now I understood he'd seen something in our daughter that I'd been too loving to recognize. The next morning, I made an appointment with my attorney, James Morrison. Jim had handled all our legal affairs for over 15 years, and I trusted his judgment completely. His office was located in a professional building downtown, and I'd always felt comfortable discussing sensitive matters with him. "Margaret, good to see you," Jim greeted me warmly as I entered his office. "How are you holding up?" "I know these past few years since Robert's passing haven't been easy." I explained the situation with Bethany and Derek, trying to keep my emotions in check but finding it difficult to hide my disappointment and hurt. Jim listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions, his expression growing more serious as I continued. "I need to know my options," I concluded. "This is my home, and I don't want to feel like a prisoner in it. But I also don't want to destroy my relationship with my daughter if there's another way to handle this." Jim leaned back in his leather chair and considered my words carefully. "Margaret, legally speaking, this is your property and you have every right to ask anyone to leave, including Bethany. But I understand that family situations are more complicated than legal rights. Have you considered having a direct conversation with her about boundaries and expectations?" I had tried, I explained, but Bethany seemed to view any attempt at setting rules as personal attacks on her freedom. Moreover, I was genuinely concerned about Derek's presence in my home. Beyond the disrespect and the going through my papers, there was something about him that made me deeply uncomfortable. "There's something else," I admitted to Jim. "I'm scheduled for gallbladder surgery next month. It's supposed to be routine, but at my age, there are always risks. If something were to happen to me, everything would go to Bethany automatically under my current will. Given her behavior lately, I'm not sure that's what Robert would have wanted." Jim nodded thoughtfully. "Margaret, you have the right to modify your will at any time for any reason. If you're concerned about how your assets would be managed or distributed, we can explore some alternatives that might better reflect your current wishes while still providing for Bethany's future." We spent the next hour discussing various options. Jim explained how I could establish conditions for inheritance, create trust funds that would prevent irresponsible spending, or even designate alternative beneficiaries for specific assets. The more we talked, the more I realized that my current will, written when Bethany was 25 and seemingly responsible, no longer reflected my understanding of my daughter's character. "Let me think about this," I told Jim as our meeting concluded. "I don't want to make any decisions while I'm angry or emotional, but I do want to explore some of these options before my surgery." That evening, I returned home to find Derek's motorcycle parts spread across my dining room table, and Bethany nowhere to be found. There were grease stains on the tablecloth my grandmother had embroidered by hand, and the smell of motor oil permeated the room where I'd served countless family dinners over the years. When Bethany finally came home around midnight, clearly having been drinking, I attempted once more to have a reasonable conversation about house rules and mutual respect. Her response was to laugh in my face and tell me I needed to get with the program, because things were changing around here, whether I liked it or not. "Derek thinks you need someone to take care of your finances anyway," she slurred. "Old people get confused about money stuff all the time. Maybe it would be better if I handled the bills and the house payments. To take the stress off you." The audacity of her suggestion left me stunned. She wanted to take control of my finances while treating my home like a frat house. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised and sacrificed for. This was a stranger who happened to share my DNA. That weekend, I made my decision. I called Jim Morrison and scheduled another appointment. I want to make some changes to my will, I told him. Significant changes. During our second meeting, I outlined exactly what I wanted to do. Instead of leaving everything directly to Bethany, I would establish a charitable trust that would provide her with a modest monthly allowance, while donating the bulk of my estate to causes Robert and I had always cared about: the local animal shelter where we'd volunteered, the community garden project we'd supported, and a scholarship fund for underprivileged children. "Are you certain about this, Margaret?" Jim asked. "This is a substantial change that will significantly impact Bethany's inheritance." I was certain, more certain than I'd been about anything in years. "My daughter has made it clear that she views me as an obstacle to getting what she wants, rather than as her mother who deserves basic respect and consideration. If I'm going to be treated like a burden, then I'll make sure my money goes to people and organizations that will actually appreciate and properly use it." Jim drafted the new will, and I signed it 3 weeks before my scheduled surgery. The document was legally binding and properly witnessed, ensuring that my wishes would be carried out regardless of what happened during my medical procedure. As my surgery date approached, I noticed Bethany and Derek becoming increasingly brazen about their plans for our house. They discussed renovation ideas in front of me, talked about which rooms they'd convert for Derek's motorcycle repair business, and even mentioned having Derek's grown children move in once there was more space available. The night before my surgery, I packed a small bag and tried to remain optimistic about the procedure. Gallbladder removal was routine these days, the surgeon had assured me, but at 72, any surgery carried risks. I'd made peace with whatever might happen, knowing that my affairs were in order and my true wishes would be honored. "I'll drive you to the hospital in the morning," Bethany offered, though her tone suggested obligation rather than genuine concern. "That's all right, dear," I replied. "I've arranged for a taxi, you get your rest." The truth was, I didn't want Bethany at the hospital. I didn't want her fake concern or her impatient sighs in the waiting room. I wanted to face this medical challenge with dignity, surrounded by the professional care of doctors and nurses rather than the toxic energy my daughter had brought into my life. As I lay in bed, that final night before surgery, I thought about Robert and how proud he'd be of the stand I was finally taking. For too many years, I'd enabled Bethany's selfishness in the name of motherly love, but real love sometimes meant setting boundaries and allowing people to face the consequences of their choices. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I had no idea that while I was unconscious on the operating table the next day, Bethany would prove just how justified my new will really was. The recovery room was a blur of beeping machines and hushed voices. I drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of nurses checking my vitals and adjusting IV lines. The surgery had taken longer than expected. What should have been a routine laparoscopic procedure had become more complicated when the surgeon discovered significant inflammation around my gallbladder. Dr. Patricia Chen, my surgeon, visited me during my second day of recovery. "Mrs. Caldwell, you're healing well, but I want to keep you here for another day or two to monitor for any signs of infection. The inflammation we found suggests this condition had been bothering you longer than you realized." I nodded weakly, still feeling the effects of the anesthesia and pain medication. "When can I go home?" "Probably Thursday or Friday, depending on how you feel and whether your incision sites look clean. Do you have someone who can help you at home for the first few days? You shouldn't be lifting anything heavy or doing strenuous activities for at least 2 weeks." I hesitated before answering. The thought of relying on Bethany for care filled me with dread, but I didn't have many other options. My sister lived in Phoenix, and my few close friends were dealing with their own health issues at our age. "My daughter is staying with me. She'll be able to help." Dr. Chen smiled reassuringly. "That's good to hear. Family support makes a big difference in recovery time." If only she knew what kind of family support awaited me at home. Thursday afternoon arrived with surprising sunshine streaming through my hospital room window. I felt stronger and more alert than I had since the surgery, though still tender around the incision sites. The discharge nurse, a cheerful woman named Sandra, went through my post-operative instructions while I signed the necessary paperwork. "Remember, No driving for at least a week. No lifting more than 10 pounds. And follow up with Dr. Chen in 7 days. Sandra recited. Do you have transportation home? I'd called Bethany that morning to arrange a pickup, but she'd sounded distracted and irritated. Yeah, I'll be there around 2, she'd said before hanging up abruptly. It was now nearly 3:30, and I hadn't heard from her. Let me try calling my daughter again, I told Sandra, reaching for my phone. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried twice more with the same result. Sandra frowned sympathetically. Would you like us to call a taxi for you? We can't discharge you without knowing you have safe transportation. Pride warred with practicality in my mind. I didn't want to admit that my own daughter had apparently forgotten to pick me up from major surgery, but I also desperately wanted to get home to my own bed. Yes, please arrange for a taxi. The ride home through Riverside's familiar streets should have been comforting. But instead I felt a growing sense of unease. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't pinpoint what exactly was bothering me. The taxi driver, a kind elderly man named Frank, helped me to my front door and waited while I searched my purse for my house keys. That's when the first shock hit me. My key wouldn't turn in the lock. I tried again, thinking perhaps my post-surgery coordination wasn't quite right yet. The key slid into the keyhole but wouldn't turn. I examined it closely. This was definitely my house key, the same one I'd used for over 20 years. Everything all right, ma'am? Frank asked from behind me. I think there might be something wrong with the lock, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I walked around to the back door, Frank following with my small overnight bag. The back door key didn't work either. Frank set down my bag and examined the locks himself. Ma'am, these look like they've been recently changed. See how the metal around the deadbolt is a different color? That's fresh hardware. My heart began racing. That's impossible. This is my house. I've lived here for 23 years. I believe you, ma'am, but somebody definitely changed these locks recently. Probably within the last few days. You might want to call whoever has the new keys. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Bethany. This time she answered on the second ring, her voice casual and slightly amused. Oh hey Mom, you're out of the hospital? Bethany, I'm standing at my front door and my keys don't work. Did you change the locks? There was a pause, followed by what sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. Oh, right. Yeah, Derek thought it would be a good security upgrade while you were away. You know, with all the break-ins in the neighborhood lately. What break-ins? And why wasn't I consulted about this? Mom, you were having surgery. We didn't want to stress you out with home improvement decisions. Derek's really good with this kind of stuff. He used to work in construction. I looked around my neighborhood. The same safe, quiet area where I'd raised my family without incident for over 2 decades. Bethany, I need to get into my house. I just had major surgery, and I need to rest. Sure. Derek's not here right now, though, and he's the one with the new keys. Can you maybe go get some coffee or something and come back in a few hours? The audacity of her suggestion left me speechless. She expected me, fresh from the hospital, to wander around town waiting for permission to enter my own home. Bethany, this is unacceptable. I'm coming around to the back. Let me in through the kitchen door. Actually, Mom, that might not be the best idea right now. We're kind of in the middle of reorganizing some stuff, and it's pretty messy. Maybe it's better if you wait for Derek to get back with the keys. Something cold settled in my stomach. What do you mean, reorganizing? Just, moving things around to make the space more functional. Derek had some really good ideas about better uses for some of the rooms. I walked around the house, peering through windows, Frank trailing behind me with growing concern. What I saw through the living room window made my knees weak. My furniture had been completely rearranged. Robert's leather recliner, his favorite spot for reading the evening paper, was gone. So was the antique secretary desk that had belonged to my grandmother. In their place sat unfamiliar furniture, a large sectional sofa I'd never seen before, and a massive flat-screen television mounted where my collection of family photos used to hang. Ma'am, are you all right? Frank asked. noticing my distress. "You've gone very pale." Through the kitchen window, I could see boxes stacked on my countertops, my cabinets standing open and half empty. It looked like someone was either moving in or moving out on a grand scale. "Bethany," I said into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where is my furniture?" "What furniture?" "My living room furniture. Dad's chair. Grandma's desk. Where are they?" Another pause. "Oh, that old stuff. Mom, seriously, some of that furniture was older than I am. Derek knows a guy who buys vintage pieces for good money. We thought you'd be happy to have some extra cash and a more updated look." The phone nearly slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers. "You sold my furniture? Without asking me?" "Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just stuff. And it's not like you were using Dad's chair anyway. You always sat on the sofa. This new living room setup is much more comfortable and modern." Frank cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, if you'd like, I can drive you to the police station." "The situation doesn't seem right to me." I nodded gratefully. At 72, fresh from surgery, I needed professional help dealing with whatever was happening to my home. The Riverside Police Department was a modern building downtown that I'd driven past hundreds of times, but never entered. Officer Maria Santos, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor, listened patiently as I explained the situation. "So your daughter lives in the house with you currently, but she changed the locks and sold your furniture while you were in the hospital." Officer Santos summarized, making notes in a small pad. "That's correct. And she won't let me into my own home." Officer Santos frowned. "Ma'am, I have to tell you that this is a complicated situation legally. Since your daughter has been living there with your permission, she has certain tenant rights. The fact that she changed the locks is problematic. But the sale of furniture gets into property law territory that's beyond what we can handle with a simple police call." My heart sank. "So there's nothing you can do?" "I can accompany you back to the house and attempt to mediate the situation. We can insist that she provide you with keys to your own home immediately. As for the furniture, that might require legal action to recover or compensation." Officer Santos drove me back to Maple Street in her patrol car, Frank having waited long enough and needing to return to work. The sight of a police cruiser in my driveway brought several neighbors out of their houses, including Eleanor Henderson from next door. "Margaret, are you all right?" Eleanor called out, hurrying across the yard. "We saw the moving truck yesterday and were worried something had happened to you." "Moving truck?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor nodded, her expression troubled. "A big U-Haul. They were loading furniture all afternoon. We thought maybe you'd decided to downsize and move into one of those nice retirement communities." Officer Santos knocked firmly on the front door. After several minutes, Bethany answered, looking annoyed until she saw the uniform. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Miss Caldwell, your mother needs access to her own home. She's just been released from the hospital and needs to rest." Bethany's expression shifted to one of false concern. Of course. I was just worried about her seeing the house in such disarray. We've been doing some redecorating as a surprise for her recovery." "I need my key, Bethany," I said firmly, "and I want to see what you've done to my house." Reluctantly, Bethany produced a shiny new key and handed it to me. "Just remember, Mom, everything we did was to make things better for you." I unlocked my own front door and stepped inside, Officer Santos close behind me. What I saw took my breath away. This wasn't redecorating. This was a complete transformation of my home into something unrecognizable. The hardwood floors I'd maintained carefully for decades were scuffed and stained. The walls where my family photos had hung for years showed faded rectangles where the pictures used to be. In the kitchen, my grandmother's china cabinet was gone, replaced by a beer refrigerator. The formal dining room had been converted into what looked like a motorcycle workshop, complete with tools, parts, and oil stains on the carpet. "Oh my God," I whispered, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Mom, I know it looks different, but just give it a chance," Bethany said quickly. "Derek has so many great ideas for making this place more livable, more practical." I walked slowly through each room, cataloging the damage. My bedroom, thankfully, seemed mostly untouched, though I noticed several items missing from my dresser top. The guest rooms had been completely emptied and appeared to be set up as additional living spaces for Derek's friends. In Robert's former home office, I found the most heartbreaking change of all. The built-in bookshelves where he'd kept his collection of military history books and where I'd displayed our wedding photos and mementos from our travels were now empty, except for motorcycle magazines and beer bottles. "Where are Dad's books?" I asked Bethany, my voice cracking. "Those dusty old war books?" "Mom, nobody reads that stuff anymore. Derek sold them to a used bookstore. He got almost $200 for them. $200 for Robert's treasured collection of first-edition military histories, books he'd spent 30 years collecting, books that represented his passion for understanding the sacrifices made by previous generations." I felt like I might faint. Officer Santos placed a steady hand on my arm. "Ma'am, why don't you sit down for a moment?" As I lowered myself carefully onto the unfamiliar sectional sofa, trying to process the magnitude of what had been done to my home, Bethany continued talking as if she were describing beneficial improvements. "Derek's friend is going to help us turn the basement into a proper workshop space, and we're thinking about converting the back porch into a beer garden area where people can hang out. The house has so much potential that was just being wasted." I looked up at my daughter, this stranger who had systematically dismantled the home Robert and I had created together, and realized that she saw nothing wrong with what she'd done. In her mind, she was improving things. She had no understanding of the sentimental value of the items she'd sold, no appreciation for the memories embedded in every piece of furniture she'd discarded. "Bethany," I said quietly, "where did you think I was going to live when I came home from the hospital?" She looked genuinely confused by the question. "Here, of course. I mean, there might not be as much old stuff cluttering up the place, but there's still plenty of room. You've got your bedroom, and you can use the kitchen just like always. And Derek, is he planning to continue living here indefinitely?" "Well, yeah, this arrangement is working out really well for everyone. Derek contributes to the household, and you don't have to worry about maintenance and upkeep anymore. It's like having a live-in handyman." A handyman who had sold my husband's books and turned my dining room into a motorcycle garage. Officer Santos stepped forward. "Ma'am, you're the legal owner of this property, correct?" "Yes. The house is in my name only. It has been since my husband passed away 3 years ago. In that case, you have the right to ask anyone to leave, including family members, if you choose to do so. You also have the right to press charges for theft if personal property was sold without your permission." Bethany's confident expression faltered slightly. "Mom, you wouldn't do that to your own daughter, would you? I mean, we're family. This is all just a big misunderstanding." I looked around the room one more time, taking in the beer bottles on my windowsill, the motorcycle parts on my dining room table, the complete absence of anything that reminded me of the life Robert and I had built together. "Officer Santos," I said, my voice growing stronger despite my physical weakness, "I'd like to know what my legal options are." "All of them." Officer Santos spent the next 20 minutes explaining my legal rights as a property owner. The situation was complex because Bethany had been living in the house with my permission, which gave her certain tenant protections under California law. However, changing locks without my consent and selling my personal property without permission were serious violations. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need to be straight with you," Officer Santos said. "Evicting a family member can be emotionally and legally complicated. You'd need to provide formal written notice, typically 30 days before you could legally require her to leave. However, the sale of your personal property without permission is theft, regardless of family relationships." Bethany had been pacing nervously during this conversation, occasionally interjecting with justifications about improving the house and making practical decisions. But when Officer Santos mentioned the word theft, her demeanor changed completely. "Theft? Are you serious? This is my childhood home. I have every right to make decisions about old junk that was just taking up space. My mother is getting older and obviously can't manage all this stuff by herself anymore." "Ma'am, Officer Santos replied firmly. It doesn't matter if you grew up here. Your name isn't on the deed, and you don't have legal authority to sell someone else's property, even with good intentions. I watched this exchange with growing clarity about my daughter's mindset. She genuinely believed she had the right to make these decisions about my life and my belongings. In her mind, my age somehow diminished my capacity to control my own affairs. Officer Santos, I'd like to file a formal complaint about the theft of my property, and I want to start eviction proceedings immediately. The color drained from Bethany's face. Mom, you can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have anywhere else to live right now. Perhaps you should have considered that before selling my husband's book collection and turning my dining room into a motorcycle shop. Officer Santos nodded. I'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to file the formal paperwork. Tonight, since you're recovering from surgery, do you have somewhere else you can stay? This situation might get tense once we serve the legal notices. I hadn't considered this practical problem. The thought of sleeping in this transformed house, surrounded by strangers' furniture, and the smell of motor oil, was unbearable, but my options were limited. Eleanor Henderson appeared at the front door, having apparently been watching the proceedings from her yard. Margaret, honey, why don't you stay with us tonight? Harold and I have plenty of room, and you shouldn't be dealing with all this stress so soon after surgery. The kindness in her offer nearly brought me to tears. Eleanor and Harold had been our neighbors for 15 years, and while we weren't extremely close, they'd always been considerate and helpful. The contrast between their concern for my well-being and my own daughter's indifference was stark. That's very generous, Eleanor. Are you sure it wouldn't be an imposition? Don't be ridiculous. Harold's already making up the guest room. You go pack whatever you need for a few days and we'll sort out this mess properly. Bethany followed me into my bedroom. As I gathered some clothing and medications, Mom, this is crazy. You're letting the neighbors turn you against your own family. Derek and I were just trying to help. I stopped packing and looked directly at her. Bethany, help would have been asking before making changes. Help would have been picking me up from the hospital when you said you would. Help would have been caring about my recovery instead of redecorating my house to suit your boyfriend's hobbies. God, you're so dramatic about everything. It's just stuff, Mom. Just things. You act like we burned down the house or something. Her inability to understand the emotional significance of what she'd destroyed was perhaps the most painful part of this entire situation. The furniture she'd sold wasn't just stuff. It was the physical foundation of the life Robert and I had built together. His chair still held the impression of his body. Grandma's desk contained love letters he'd written me during his military deployment. These weren't random objects, they were tangible connections to the people and memories that had shaped my life. Where are the photo albums, Bethany? She looked uncomfortable for the first time. What photo albums? The family albums, the ones that were in Dad's office. Our wedding pictures, your baby pictures, photos from all our family vacations. Oh, those? Derek thought they were taking up too much space in the bookshelf. I think they're in boxes in the basement. I felt a surge of relief. At least the photographs might be salvageable. I want to get them before I leave. The basement stairs were steep and poorly lit, challenging for someone in my post-operative condition. Bethany reluctantly helped me down, where I found a dozen cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly near the water heater. Many were unmarked, and several showed water damage from a minor leak in the basement ceiling that I'd been meaning to have repaired. Opening the first box, I found photo albums mixed randomly with my good china, wrapped carelessly in the newspaper. Several albums had water stains on their covers. Another box contained Robert's military medals and commendations thrown in with kitchen utensils and Christmas decorations. Bethany, these are irreplaceable family heirlooms. Look at this water damage. She shrugged. I didn't know it leaked down here. Besides, Derek said we could scan the important pictures and throw out the albums to save space. He knows about digital organization and stuff. The idea of Derek, the man who'd turned my dining room into a motorcycle garage, deciding which family memories were worth preserving, made me physically ill. I carefully selected the most important photo albums and Robert's military box to take with me, knowing I'd have to return for the rest once I figured out how to handle this situation properly. Eleanor and Harold Henderson welcomed me into their home with the kind of genuine warmth I'd been missing in my own house. Their guest room was comfortable and quiet, decorated with soft colors and family photos that reminded me of how a home should feel. "Margaret, we've been worried about you," Harold said over a cup of tea in their kitchen. "We saw some unusual activity at your house this week but didn't want to intrude. That boyfriend of Bethany's has been coming and going at all hours with different groups of people." Eleanor nodded. "And the noise? They've been playing loud music until 2 or 3 in the morning. We almost called the police ourselves, but we thought maybe you'd given permission for some kind of renovation work." This was news to me. Bethany had been throwing parties while I was unconscious in the hospital, treating my recovery time like a vacation opportunity. The disrespect was breathtaking. "There's something else," Eleanor said gently. "We saw them loading furniture into a truck yesterday, and, well, we recognized some pieces. That beautiful antique secretary that used to be in your living room window. Your husband's leather chair. We were confused because we thought you were still in the hospital. They sold them without telling me, along with Robert's book collection and apparently anything else they thought would bring cash." Harold's face darkened. "Margaret, that's not right. Family or no family, that's stealing. You should press charges." That evening, as I sat in the Hendersons' peaceful living room, looking through the rescued photo albums, I thought about the irony of my situation. I was more comfortable and felt more respected in my neighbor's home than I had felt in my own house for months. Strangers were treating me with more consideration than my own daughter. The next morning, I called Jim Morrison and explained everything that had happened. His reaction was immediate and decisive. "Margaret, this changes everything. Come in this afternoon and bring documentation of what was taken. We need to discuss not just the criminal aspects of this situation, but how it impacts your estate planning." "What do you mean?" "The new will we drafted specifically addresses situations like this. Bethany's actions while you were vulnerable and hospitalized demonstrate exactly the kind of behavior we were trying to protect against. We need to make sure all your legal documents reflect your current circumstances." That afternoon, in Jim's office, I provided a detailed inventory of everything I could remember that had been sold or destroyed. The financial value was substantial. Robert's book collection alone had been worth several $1,000s, and the antique furniture was irreplaceable. But more importantly, Jim explained how this behavior supported the reasoning behind my new will. "Margaret, courts look at patterns of behavior when evaluating estate disputes. If Bethany ever contests your will, her actions during your medical crisis will be crucial evidence. The fact that she sold your property without permission while you were unconscious creates a clear record of financial exploitation of an elderly person." Jim had brought in Sarah Chen, an elder law specialist from his firm, to consult on my case. Sarah was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in protecting seniors from financial abuse. "Mrs. Caldwell, what your daughter did meets the legal definition of elder financial abuse under California law. This isn't just about family disagreements. This is about criminal behavior. The fact that she did it while you were hospitalized makes it worse." Sarah explained that I could pursue both criminal charges and civil recovery for the value of my stolen property. More importantly for my situation, Bethany's actions strengthened the legal foundation for my revised will. When someone demonstrates a pattern of financial exploitation, courts are very supportive of estate plans that limit that person's access to additional assets. Your new will isn't about punishment, it's about protection. We spent 2 hours documenting everything and developing a comprehensive legal strategy. Jim would handle the eviction proceedings and property recovery, while Sarah would file elder abuse charges and help me document the full extent of the financial losses. "There's one more thing we should discuss," Jim said as our meeting concluded. "Given what's happened, you might want to consider revoking Bethany's power of attorney privileges immediately. If she's willing to sell your furniture without permission, we can't trust her to make medical or financial decisions on your behalf if you ever become incapacitated." This was something I hadn't even thought about. Years ago, when Bethany seemed more responsible, I'd granted her power of attorney as a practical matter. Someone needed legal authority to handle my affairs if I ever became unable to do so myself, but now that authority represents a dangerous vulnerability. Yes, let's revoke that immediately and designate someone else. I ended up naming Jim as my alternate power of attorney, with Harold Henderson as backup. These were people who would actually respect my wishes and act in my best interest rather than their own. That evening, Eleanor helped me call my sister Linda in Phoenix to explain the situation. Linda was horrified. Margaret, I never trusted that Derek character, but I never thought Bethany would do something like this. Do you want me to come out there? I can be on a plane tomorrow. The offer was tempting, but I knew Linda had her own health issues, and her presence might just complicate an already difficult situation. Not yet, but thank you. I'm staying with the Hendersons for now, and I have good legal representation. I need to handle this myself. What about Bethany? Have you talked to her since yesterday? I hadn't. My phone had several missed calls from her, but I wasn't ready for whatever manipulation or guilt trip she might attempt. I think our next conversation needs to happen through lawyers. Good for you. I know this must be heartbreaking, but sometimes our children make choices that force us to protect ourselves. Dad would be proud of you for standing up for yourself. After hanging up with Linda, I sat in the Hendersons' guest room and reflected on how drastically my life had changed in just a few days. A week ago, I was a mother preparing for routine surgery, worried about my daughter's living situation, but hopeful that things would improve. Tonight, I was essentially homeless, staying with neighbors while pursuing legal action against my own child. But for the first time in months, I also felt a sense of clarity and purpose. Bethany's actions had revealed her true character in a way that years of smaller disappointments hadn't. She saw me as an obstacle to getting what she wanted rather than as her mother who deserved basic respect and consideration. The new will I'd signed 3 weeks ago suddenly felt like the most important decision I'd made since Robert's death. I'd protected my legacy from someone who had proven herself unworthy of the sacrifices Robert and I had made to build our life together. Tomorrow would bring formal legal proceedings, difficult conversations, and probably more heartbreak. But tonight, I was safe, surrounded by people who treated me with dignity, and secure in the knowledge that my affairs were in proper order. Bethany still had no idea what she'd really cost herself by changing those locks. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Henderson house. I was having breakfast with Eleanor when the doorbell rang at 8:30. Through the window, I could see a young woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. Mrs. Caldwell, I'm Detective Amanda Foster with the Riverside County Elder Abuse Unit. I understand you'd like to file charges regarding theft and financial exploitation. I hadn't expected the criminal investigation to move so quickly. Detective Foster was younger than I'd anticipated, probably in her early 30s, but her professional demeanor was reassuring. Yes, Detective. Though I should mention that the person who stole from me is my daughter. Detective Foster's expression didn't change. Ma'am, family relationships don't alter the law. Elder financial abuse is a serious felony in California, regardless of who commits it. May I come in, so we can discuss the details? Eleanor graciously offered her living room for our meeting. Detective Foster spread out forms and documentation on the coffee table with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Caldwell, I've already spoken with Officer Santos and reviewed her initial report. I also contacted your attorney yesterday evening. Mr. Morrison provided some background on your situation. What I need from you today is a complete timeline of events and a detailed inventory of what was taken. For the next hour, I walked Detective Foster through everything that had happened, starting with Bethany's initial move back home and culminating in my discovery of the changed locks and missing furniture. She took careful notes and asked specific questions about dates, values, and witnesses. You mentioned that neighbors saw the moving truck. Do you think Mr. and Mrs. Henderson would be willing to provide statements? Eleanor, who had been quietly listening from the kitchen, immediately volunteered. Absolutely. We documented everything we saw because it seemed so unusual. Harold even took some pictures from our window. This was news to me. Pictures? Harold appeared from the back room with a digital camera. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I felt like something wasn't right, but I didn't want to interfere in family business. When I saw them loading your husband's chair, the one you always told us he loved so much, I started taking photos just in case." He scrolled through the camera's memory, showing Detective Foster clear images of Derek and several other men loading recognizable pieces of my furniture into a large rental truck. The timestamp showed they'd worked for most of the day while I was unconscious in recovery. "This is excellent evidence," Detective Foster said. "Mr. Henderson, I'll need copies of all these photos. Mrs. Caldwell, do you recognize the other men helping with the move?" I studied the photos carefully. Besides Derek, there were 3 other men I'd never seen before. "No, I don't know any of them, but this explains why my neighbors mentioned seeing Derek with different groups of people at odd hours." Detective Foster made additional notes. "We'll need to identify these individuals. They could be charged as accomplices if they knowingly participated in theft. Do you have any idea where your furniture might have been taken?" I remembered Bethany mentioning that Derek knew someone who bought vintage pieces. "My daughter said Derek sold some items to someone who deals in vintage furniture, but I don't know who or where. We'll track that down." In California, anyone purchasing significant amounts of used furniture is required to keep records of transactions and seller identification. If they follow proper procedures, we'll be able to trace everything. The interview continued for another hour, as Detective Foster gathered information about Bethany's financial situation, Derek's background, and the overall living arrangement that had led to this situation. Her questions were thorough but not judgmental, and I found myself feeling hopeful that justice might actually be possible. "Mrs. Caldwell, based on what you've told me and the evidence I've seen, I believe we have a strong case for elder financial abuse and grand theft. The total value of stolen property appears to exceed $10,000, which makes this a felony under California law. What happens next?" "I'll continue investigating to identify the other individuals involved and track down your stolen property. Within the next few days, I'll present my findings to the district attorney's office for formal charges. You should also know that once charges are filed, there may be additional legal protections available to you." After Detective Foster left, I felt emotionally drained but oddly relieved. For months, I'd questioned whether my concerns about Bethany's behavior were legitimate or just the complaints of an aging mother who couldn't adapt to change. Having law enforcement validate that her actions constituted serious crimes helped me trust my own judgment. Eleanor brought me a fresh cup of tea and sat down beside me. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Harold and I are proud of you for taking action. What Bethany did was wrong, and you have every right to hold her accountable. It's just so hard to believe it's come to this. When I was raising her, I never imagined we'd end up in a situation where I'd need police protection from my own daughter. Sometimes the hardest thing about loving someone is recognizing when they've stopped deserving that love through their own choices." That afternoon, Jim Morrison called with updates on the civil proceedings. "Margaret, I've filed the eviction notice and the civil theft complaint. Bethany has been served with papers requiring her to vacate the property within 30 days and demanding return or compensation for your stolen belongings." "How did she react?" "About as you'd expect. She's hired her own attorney, someone named Bradley Watts, who apparently specializes in tenant rights cases. He's already contacted my office claiming that Bethany has tenant protections and that the sale of furniture was authorized by her status as your caregiver." This was infuriating. "Caregiver? She never provided any care. If anything, her presence made my life more difficult and stressful." "I know, and we have documentation to prove that. The hospital records show you arranged your own transportation and care. Your neighbors can testify that she didn't even visit you during your stay. Her attorney's claims won't hold up under scrutiny." Jim explained that Bethany's legal strategy seemed focused on portraying herself as a concerned daughter who had made difficult decisions while caring for an aging mother. Her attorney was apparently arguing that my post-surgery emotional state was affecting my judgment and that family financial arrangements were being mischaracterized as theft. "It's a common defense strategy in these cases," Jim said. They'll try to paint you as confused or vindictive rather than addressing the actual criminal behavior. That's why the police investigation is so important. It provides objective evidence of what really happened. That evening, Bethany finally appeared at the Henderson house. I was reading in the living room when Eleanor answered a firm knock at the front door. "I want to speak with my mother," I heard Bethany say, her voice loud enough to carry through the house. Eleanor's response was calm but firm. "Bethany, she's recovering from major surgery and doesn't need additional stress right now." "This is ridiculous. She's my mother, and I have a right to talk to her." These people are filling her head with nonsense and turning her against her own family. I decided to handle this confrontation myself rather than hiding behind my kind neighbors. Walking slowly to the front door, I found Bethany standing on the porch looking agitated and defensive. "Hello, Bethany." "Mom. Thank God. I've been so worried about you. This whole situation has gotten completely out of hand. We need to talk and sort this out before it goes any further." "I'm listening. Can we talk privately? Without an audience?" She glanced meaningfully at Eleanor, who was standing protectively nearby. "Eleanor and Harold have been nothing but kind to me. If you have something to say, you can say it here." Bethany's facade of concern began to crack. "Fine. Mom, you're making a huge mistake with all these lawyers and police reports. Derek and I were trying to help you. The house needed updating, and some of that old furniture was falling apart anyway. We were going to surprise you with a whole new look by selling my husband's belongings without permission while I was unconscious in the hospital. Dad's been dead for 3 years, Mom. At some point, you have to stop living in a shrine and move forward with your life. Derek was helping you do that." The casual cruelty of her words took my breath away. "Those weren't shrine objects, Bethany. They were my home. My memories. My choice is to keep or let go." "Your choice? Mom, you're 72 years old. You can barely maintain that big house by yourself. Derek and I were taking care of things you couldn't handle anymore." Eleanor stepped forward. "Bethany, your mother is perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. She's one of the most organized and competent people I know." Bethany turned on Eleanor with surprising venom. "Stay out of this. This is between me and my mother. You people have no idea what our family situation is really like." "I know what theft looks like," Harold said, appearing behind Eleanor. "And I know what disrespect looks like. We've been watching your behavior for months, young lady, and nothing about it suggests you were helping anyone but yourself." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Bethany said, turning back to me. "These neighbors are poisoning your mind against your own daughter. Mom, I'm the only family you have left. Don't let strangers destroy our relationship." I looked at my daughter. This woman who had systematically violated my trust, sold my treasured possessions, and transformed my home into something unrecognizable, and felt a strange sense of clarity. "Bethany, you destroyed our relationship yourself. I didn't need anyone's help to recognize that changing my locks while I was in surgery and selling my husband's belongings without permission was wrong. That's not confusion or outside influence. That's basic human decency." "God, you're so stubborn. Everything I did was for your own good. The house is better now. More functional, more modern. You'll see that once you get past this tantrum." "Tantrum?" The word hung in the air like a slap. At 72, recovering from surgery, dealing with the theft of irreplaceable family heirlooms, I was having a tantrum. "Yes, tantrum. You're acting like a child who didn't get her way. Derek and I put a lot of work into improving your living situation, and instead of being grateful, you're throwing a fit and involving lawyers and police." Eleanor gasped audibly at Bethany's words. Even Harold, who rarely showed strong emotions, looked shocked by her attitude. "Bethany," I said quietly, "I want you to leave now. Don't come back to this house, and don't contact me again except through attorneys." "You don't mean that." "I absolutely mean it. You've shown me exactly who you are and what you think of me. I'm done pretending that your behavior is acceptable because we share DNA." Bethany's expression shifted from disbelief to anger. "Fine, But don't come crying to me when you're old and alone and need someone to take care of you. Derek and I won't be there to help next time. I'm counting on that. After Bethany left, I sat in the Hendersons' living room feeling emotionally exhausted but strangely liberated. The conversation had removed any lingering doubt about my decision to change my will. Bethany had made it clear that she viewed my age as a justification for overriding my autonomy, and that she expected gratitude for violating my trust. "Margaret," Eleanor said gently, "are you all right?" "Actually, I think I am. For the first time in months, I feel like I can see the situation clearly without making excuses for her behavior." That night, I called Jim Morrison at home. "Jim, I want to make sure my new will is completely bulletproof. After tonight's conversation with Bethany, I'm certain she'll contest whatever I decide." "What happened?" I described the confrontation in detail, including Bethany's attitude about my age and her expectation that I should be grateful for her unauthorized changes to my home. "Margaret, document everything. Keep a journal of these interactions. If she continues to contact you, save any messages or emails. This kind of behavior supports the legal reasoning behind your estate planning decisions." "There's something else I want to add to the will." "What's that?" "I want to include a specific clause explaining why I've made these decisions. I want it clearly stated that this isn't about senility or confusion, but about protecting my assets from someone who has demonstrated financial irresponsibility and disrespect for my autonomy." Jim was quiet for a moment. "That's called a no-contest clause with explanatory language. It's legally permissible and can be very effective in preventing successful challenges to your wishes." As I prepared for bed in the Hendersons' guest room, I thought about the conversation with Bethany and felt surprisingly at peace. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. The girl I'd raised with love and sacrifice had become a woman who saw my aging as an opportunity for personal gain, rather than a reason for increased care and respect. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more difficult decisions, and probably more heartache, but tonight, I was surrounded by people who treated me with dignity, and my affairs were arranged to reflect my true values rather than my naive hopes about family loyalty. Bethany still had no idea that her inheritance had already disappeared, quietly and legally, 3 weeks before she'd ever changed those locks. 3 days after my confrontation with Bethany, Detective Foster called with significant developments in the criminal investigation. I was helping Eleanor tend her flower garden when my phone rang, the physical activity helping me regain strength while keeping my mind occupied. "Mrs. Caldwell, we've made substantial progress tracking your stolen property. The good news is we've located most of your furniture. The complicated news is that it involves multiple buyers and potentially more criminal charges." My heart jumped. "You found Robert's chair?" "Yes, ma'am. Along with the antique desk and several other pieces. It turns out Derek Hoffman has been running a more sophisticated operation than we initially realized. He's been targeting elderly homeowners throughout Riverside County, gaining access to their homes through various means, then systematically stealing and reselling valuable items. This revelation was staggering. Derek hadn't just been a bad boyfriend taking advantage of my daughter's living situation. He was apparently a career criminal who had specifically targeted me as a vulnerable elderly person. "How many other victims are there?" "At least 6 that we've identified so far, possibly more. The pattern is always similar. He finds a way to gain access to homes of seniors, either through relationships or by posing as a handyman, then gradually removes valuable items while the owners are absent or incapacitated." I sat down heavily on Eleanor's garden bench, trying to process this information. "Detective, are you saying my daughter was part of a criminal enterprise?" "That's what we're investigating. The question is whether Ms. Caldwell was a knowing participant or an unwitting accomplice. Her role in providing access to your home was crucial to the operation, but we need to determine her level of awareness about Derek's other activities. The possibility that Bethany might have been manipulated by Derek rather than being an equal partner in the theft created a confusing mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe she'd been victimized too, but her behavior during our recent confrontations suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. What happens to my furniture now? We'll be able to return everything once it's been processed as evidence. The buyers cooperated fully once they realized they'd purchased stolen goods. Most of them are legitimate antique dealers who had no idea about Derek's methods. Detective Foster explained that Derek had been arrested that morning at a storage facility where he kept items between theft and sale. The facility contained furniture and personal belongings from multiple victims, creating a treasure trove of evidence for the prosecution. Mrs. Caldwell, there's something else you should know. We found journals and notebooks in Derek's storage unit that contain detailed information about his various targets, including specific notes about your house, your routine, and your financial situation. What kind of notes? Very detailed observations about your habits, your relationships with neighbors, your medical appointments, and assessments of what items in your home might be valuable. He'd been planning this operation for months, possibly since he first started visiting your house. The systematic nature of the criminal targeting made me feel sick. While I'd been trying to be a welcoming mother and give Bethany's boyfriend the benefit of the doubt, he'd been cataloging my possessions and planning their theft. Does Bethany know about his arrest? We informed her this morning when we searched your house for additional evidence. Her attorney was present, and she didn't seem surprised by the charges against Derek. What was interesting was her reaction when we showed her some of Derek's notes about your property. What do you mean? She seemed genuinely shocked by the level of detail in his planning. Either she's an excellent actress, or she really didn't understand the scope of what he was doing. After hanging up with Detective Foster, I found myself in the unusual position of feeling sorry for Bethany while still being furious about her actions. If she'd truly been manipulated by Derek, it would explain some of her behavior, but it wouldn't excuse her complete disregard for my feelings and autonomy. Eleanor, who had been quietly weeding nearby during my phone conversation, approached with her usual gentle wisdom. Margaret, what are you thinking about all this? I don't know what to think. Part of me wonders if Bethany was as much a victim as I was, but then I remember how she spoke to me the other night, how dismissive she was about my age and my right to make my own decisions. People can be victims and perpetrators at the same time, Eleanor observed. Being manipulated by Derek doesn't excuse how she treated you, especially after she knew you were upset about the changes to your house. That afternoon, Jim Morrison called with updates on the legal proceedings. Margaret, Derek's arrest changes some aspects of your case, but it doesn't eliminate your claims against Bethany. Even if she was manipulated, she still participated in selling your property without permission. What about the eviction? That's proceeding on schedule. Bethany's attorney is trying to use Derek's arrest as leverage, claiming she was coerced and shouldn't be held responsible for his actions. But the law is clear. Being in a bad relationship doesn't give someone the right to steal from their family members. Jim explained that Bethany's legal team was likely to argue for a more lenient resolution now that Derek had been revealed as the mastermind. They might offer to make financial restitution in exchange for dropping the criminal charges and allowing her to remain in the house. What do you think I should do? That depends on what outcome you want. Do you want Bethany punished? Or do you want your property restored and your autonomy respected? Those might require different approaches. I thought about this question for the rest of the day. What did I actually want from this situation? Revenge against my daughter for her betrayal, justice for the violation of my trust, or simply the restoration of my peaceful home and the assurance that I could live my remaining years with dignity? That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Patricia Chen, my surgeon, appeared at the Hendersons' door carrying a small bouquet of flowers. Mrs. Caldwell, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I heard about your situation from the hospital social worker and wanted to check on your recovery. I invited Dr. Chen in, touched by her personal concern. Most doctors I'd known maintained professional distance, but she seemed genuinely worried about my well-being beyond the surgical site. How are you feeling physically? Any pain or complications from the surgery? The incision sites are healing well, and I haven't had any fever or unusual symptoms. But I have to admit, the stress of this legal situation probably isn't helping my recovery. Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically. Mrs. Caldwell, I've been practicing medicine for 15 years, and I've seen too many cases where family members take advantage of elderly patients during vulnerable periods. What happened to you isn't uncommon, unfortunately. Really? Hospital social workers estimate that financial abuse of seniors spikes during medical crises. Adult children or other relatives often view a parent's hospitalization as an opportunity to make changes they couldn't implement otherwise. It's particularly common with property and possessions. Dr. Chan's professional perspective helped me understand that my situation wasn't a personal failure of parenting or judgment. It was part of a broader pattern of elder abuse that many families experienced. The important thing is that you're taking action to protect yourself. Too many seniors accept this kind of treatment because they feel guilty about challenging their own children. After Dr. Chen left, I spent the evening reflecting on her words. The guilt aspect resonated particularly strongly. Despite everything Bethany had done, I still felt conflicted about pursuing legal action against my own daughter. The societal expectation that mothers should unconditionally support their children, regardless of their behavior, was deeply ingrained. But Dr. Chen was right. Accepting abuse in the name of family loyalty only enabled more abuse. By holding Bethany accountable for her actions, I was potentially protecting other elderly people she might target in the future, whether through Derek's influence or her own poor judgment. The next morning brought a surprise call from Bethany herself, the first time she'd contacted me directly since our confrontation at the Henderson house. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee somewhere neutral? I have some things I need to tell you about Derek that you don't know." Her tone was different, less defensive, more subdued. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a small cafe downtown, with the understanding that Harold would drive me and wait nearby in case I needed support. Bethany was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, looking haggard and nervous. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping well, and her usual confident demeanor was notably absent. "Mom, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." I sat down across from her, maintaining careful emotional distance. "I'm here to listen, but I'm not here to be manipulated or guilt-tripped. I know. I understand why you don't trust me right now." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "Mom, I had no idea about Derek's other activities. The police showed me his notebooks yesterday, and I was horrified. He had detailed plans about targeting you specifically. Information about your medical appointments. Assessments of what items in the house were worth stealing. How could you not know? You were living with him. He told me he was helping you modernize and that the money from selling old furniture would go toward updating the house with things you'd actually use. I thought we were doing something good for you. Even if the timing wasn't ideal." I studied my daughter's face, trying to assess her sincerity. "Bethany, even if that were true, why didn't you ask my permission? Why did you change the locks and exclude me from decisions about my own home?" Her composure began to crack. "Because I thought you'd say no. You're so attached to Dad's things, and I genuinely believed you'd be happier with a fresh start if you just gave it a chance. So you decided to force that choice on me while I was unconscious and vulnerable." "Yes." The admission came out as barely a whisper. "And I know how terrible that sounds now. I know how wrong it was." For the first time since this nightmare began, Bethany seemed to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. But understanding wasn't the same as trustworthiness, and remorse didn't undo the violation of my autonomy. "Mom, I want to make this right. I'll testify against Derek. I'll help recover every piece of property that can be found. I'll pay restitution for anything that can't be recovered. Just please don't press charges against me." "What about the house?" "I'll move out. I'll follow the eviction order and find somewhere else to live. I can't handle going to jail. My life is already destroyed because of Derek's lies. Please don't make it worse." I looked at this woman who was biologically my daughter but who had become a stranger through her own choices. Part of me wanted to believe her remorse was genuine, but another part remembered her dismissive attitude just days earlier when she'd called my concerns a tantrum. "Bethany, I need to think about this. Your apology is appreciated, but it doesn't erase what happened. More importantly, it doesn't give me confidence that you understand why your behavior was fundamentally wrong beyond just getting caught. What do you mean? You've apologized for being deceived by Derek and for the theft aspects of what happened. But you haven't acknowledged that treating me like an incompetent child who needed my choices made for me was wrong regardless of Derek's involvement. She looked confused. I thought I was helping you adapt to changes you needed but were too emotionally attached to make yourself. There it was, the core issue that Derek's criminal behavior had obscured. Bethany genuinely believed that my age gave her the right to override my autonomy, for what she perceived as my own good. The theft was Derek's crime, but the fundamental disrespect for my dignity was hers alone. Bethany, that attitude is exactly why I can't trust you with access to my life or my property. You've decided that being 72 means I'm no longer capable of making my own decisions about my own belongings in my own home. But Mom, sometimes people do need help making difficult changes. Stop. I held up my hand. Right there. You're still doing it. You're still arguing that you know better than I do about what's good for me. That's not love, Bethany. That's control. She sat back in her chair, looking genuinely stunned. I never thought about it that way. Then you have a lot more thinking to do before we can have any kind of relationship. I stood to leave, feeling emotionally drained but clearer than ever about the choices I needed to make. Bethany's apology had revealed that while Derek might have been the criminal mastermind, my daughter's fundamental lack of respect for my autonomy was entirely her own. As Harold drove me back to the Henderson house, I thought about the will I'd signed weeks earlier. Every conversation with Bethany only confirmed that my decision to redirect my inheritance away from her had been the right choice. She might learn to respect boundaries eventually, but I couldn't risk my life's work supporting someone who saw my aging as justification for controlling my choices. The new will wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. Protection for my legacy and protection for any other elderly person who might cross paths with someone who believed good intentions justified overriding another person's autonomy. 2 weeks after my coffee meeting with Bethany, the criminal case against Derek reached a pivotal moment. District Attorney Rebecca Walsh had decided to pursue maximum penalties, charging him with organized elder abuse, grand theft, and racketeering. The evidence was overwhelming. His notebooks contained detailed profiles of 12 elderly victims across 3 counties, with my case being the most thoroughly documented. Detective Foster called me with an unexpected development. Mrs. Caldwell, Derek's attorney, has approached us about a plea bargain. He wants to testify against other accomplices in exchange for a reduced sentence. But there's something you should know. He's claiming that Bethany was more involved than she's admitted. What kind of involvement? According to Derek, Bethany helped him identify potential targets in your neighborhood and provided detailed information about your financial situation that she gathered from going through your personal papers. He's claiming she was a willing partner who knew exactly what the operation entailed. My stomach dropped. If Derek's claims were true, then Bethany's tearful apology had been another manipulation. She hadn't been an innocent victim, caught up in his scheme. She'd been an active participant in targeting other elderly people for theft. How credible is his testimony? That's the challenge. Derek is obviously trying to reduce his own culpability by implicating others. But he has specific details about conversations with Bethany that would be difficult to fabricate. We're still investigating to determine what can be corroborated. The possibility that my daughter had helped Derek target other seniors like myself was almost too painful to contemplate. It suggested a level of callousness that went far beyond poor judgment or manipulation by a boyfriend. That afternoon, I was reading in the Hendersons' garden when an unfamiliar car pulled into their driveway. A woman in her 60s emerged, walking with the aid of a cane, and looking around nervously. "Excuse me," she called out. "I'm looking for Margaret Caldwell." The police gave me this address. I approached cautiously. "I'm Margaret Caldwell. My name is Dorothy Pierce. Detective Foster suggested I speak with you about Derek Hoffman and what happened to both of us." Eleanor appeared from the house, immediately sensing the need for privacy, and invited us to use her living room. Dorothy accepted gratefully, moving slowly and clearly still recovering from some kind of injury. "Mrs. Caldwell, I read about your case in the newspaper, and I had to meet you. Derek and your daughter targeted me 6 months ago, and I think you should know what really happened." Dorothy's story was chillingly similar to mine, but with crucial differences that revealed Bethany's true role. Derek had approached Dorothy at a grocery store, claiming to be a handyman looking for work, but instead of moving in himself, he had sent Bethany to Dorothy's house posing as a concerned neighbor offering to help with household tasks. "Your daughter was so convincing," Dorothy explained. "She said she'd noticed I was having trouble maintaining my yard and offered to help. She seemed so sweet and genuine that I let her into my home regularly for weeks." "What did she do there?" "At first, just helpful things. Light cleaning, organizing cabinets, helping me sort through old papers, but now I realize she was gathering information about my valuables and my routine. She asked very specific questions about my late husband's collections and whether I had family who visited regularly." Dorothy pulled out a photograph from her purse. "The police found this in Derek's storage unit. It's my husband's watch collection that disappeared while I was in the hospital for hip surgery. Your daughter knew exactly when I'd be away because I'd mentioned the surgery dates to her." The photograph showed an organized display of vintage watches, clearly valuable pieces that had been carefully cataloged for sale. The systematic nature of the theft operation was becoming clearer, and Bethany's role was far more central than she'd admitted. "Mrs. Pierce, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Did you recover your husband's watches?" "Some of them. 3 were sold before the police raid. Probably gone forever." Dorothy's voice broke slightly. "Those watches were the only things I had left of my Robert. He'd collected them for 40 years. The parallel to my own loss of Robert's books was devastating. Bethany hadn't just participated in stealing objects, she'd helped destroy irreplaceable connections between elderly widows and their deceased husbands. "There's something else," Dorothy continued. "When the police interviewed me about your daughter's visits, I remembered something she said that didn't make sense at the time. She mentioned that elderly people often held on to things they couldn't properly appreciate anymore, and that sometimes family members had to make difficult decisions for their own good." The words echoed Bethany's justifications for her actions in my home. This wasn't a philosophy she'd developed after being manipulated by Derek. It was a belief system she'd brought to the criminal operation. After Dorothy left, I sat in Eleanor's garden feeling emotionally shattered. The daughter I'd raised had apparently spent months infiltrating the homes of vulnerable elderly people, gaining their trust, and then systematically cataloging their possessions for theft. The scope of the betrayal was almost incomprehensible. That evening, Jim Morrison called with urgent news. "Margaret, Bethany's attorney, contacted me this afternoon. They want to schedule a meeting to discuss a comprehensive settlement of all civil and criminal matters." "What kind of settlement?" "Full restitution for all stolen property, payment for damages and emotional distress, a formal apology, and agreement to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for your support of a lenient sentence recommendation." I was quiet for a long moment, processing this development. "Jim, I met another victim today. An elderly woman named Dorothy Pierce. Bethany targeted her months before she ever moved into my house." "I know. Detective Foster briefed me on Mrs. Pierce's case this afternoon. Margaret, if these allegations are true, they significantly change the nature of what we're dealing with. This wasn't impulsive bad judgment. It was premeditated criminal targeting of vulnerable seniors." Jim explained that the settlement offer might be Bethany's attempt to avoid facing the full extent of criminal charges related to the broader operation. If prosecutors could prove she was a knowing participant in targeting multiple victims, she could face substantial prison time under California's elder abuse statutes. "What do you recommend?" "I think you should hear what they have to offer. But don't make any commitments. We need to understand exactly what Bethany's role was in the larger scheme before deciding how to proceed." The settlement meeting was scheduled for the following week at Jim's office. Bethany would be accompanied by her attorney, Bradley Watts, and Detective Foster would be present to ensure any discussions didn't interfere with the ongoing criminal investigation. Meanwhile, I spent time documenting my own recovery process and the ongoing impact of Bethany's actions. Dr. Chen had referred me to a counselor who specialized in elder abuse cases, and those sessions were helping me understand the psychological dimensions of what had happened. Margaret, the counselor, Dr. Lisa Martinez, had explained, "What you're experiencing is a form of complex grief. You're not just mourning the loss of your possessions or your sense of security, you're mourning the loss of the relationship you thought you had with your daughter. It feels like the person I raised doesn't exist anymore. Perhaps she never existed in the way you imagined." Children are very skilled at showing parents what they want to see, especially when there are financial incentives involved. Your daughter may have been planning this kind of behavior for years while maintaining a facade of normal family relationships. Dr. Martinez had encouraged me to write down my feelings and experiences, both as a therapeutic exercise and as potential evidence for legal proceedings. Those journal entries were revealing patterns I hadn't consciously recognized: years of small boundary violations, subtle manipulations, and gradual erosion of my autonomy that had prepared the ground for Bethany's major betrayal. The night before the settlement meeting, I received an unexpected phone call from my sister Linda in Phoenix. "Margaret, I've been thinking about our conversation from last week, and there's something I need to tell you about Bethany that I probably should have mentioned years ago." "What is it?" "When Dad was dying, Bethany asked me several times about his will and what he was leaving to whom. She seemed unusually interested in the financial details, asking questions about property values and investment accounts that seemed inappropriate for someone her age." Linda continued, "At the time, I thought she was just trying to understand the family situation. But looking back, her questions were very specific and calculating. She wanted to know exactly what you would inherit, and whether Dad had any debts that might reduce the estate value." This revelation suggested that Bethany's interest in my finances wasn't recent. She'd apparently been monitoring family wealth and inheritance prospects for years, possibly since before Robert's death. "Linda, why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I hoped I was wrong about her motivations. I wanted to believe she was just a daughter trying to understand her family's financial security. But given what's happened now, I think her behavior followed a longer pattern than either of us realized." The next morning, I arrived at Jim Morrison's office, feeling more prepared and determined than I had in weeks. The settlement meeting would be my opportunity to hear Bethany's explanation for her involvement in the broader criminal operation and to decide whether any reconciliation was possible. Bethany appeared nervous and subdued, sitting close to her attorney and avoiding direct eye contact with me. Bradley Watts was a thin man in his 50s who immediately launched into a presentation about his client's willingness to cooperate and make amends. "Mrs. Caldwell, my client deeply regrets her involvement in this unfortunate situation. She's prepared to make full financial restitution and to assist law enforcement in prosecuting Derek Hoffman to the fullest extent of the law." "What about the other victims?" I asked directly. "What about Dorothy Pierce and the other elderly people she helped target?" Bethany looked up sharply. "Mom, I never targeted anyone. Derek told me those people were friends of his who needed help organizing their homes. I didn't know about any theft." Detective Foster leaned forward. "Ms. Caldwell, we have evidence that you made detailed reports to Derek about the contents and security measures of at least 6 different homes. You provided floor plans, schedules of when residents would be absent, and assessments of valuable items. Those weren't reports of theft. Derek said he was helping those people with estate planning and organization. He said elderly people often needed assistance managing their possessions, but were too proud to ask family members for help." I studied my daughter's face as she offered this explanation. Either she was an accomplished liar, or she had genuinely convinced herself that she was providing a helpful service rather than facilitating crimes. "Bethany," I said quietly, "even if that were true, why didn't you suggest that these people contact legitimate estate planning services or family members directly? Why did it have to be secret?" "Because Derek said elderly people were often resistant to change and needed to see improvements before they could appreciate them. He said the surprise element was crucial for overcoming natural reluctance." The explanation was almost identical to her justification for the changes to my house. Bethany seemed to have bought into a philosophy that elderly people couldn't be trusted to make their own decisions and needed younger people to override their choices for their own good. Bradley Watts continued with the settlement proposal. Mrs. Caldwell, my client is willing to plead guilty to accessory charges, pay full restitution to all victims, and serve community service in exchange for a recommendation of no jail time. Jim looked at me. Margaret, you don't have to decide today. Take time to consider what outcome you want from this situation. I looked across the table at Bethany, this woman who had systematically violated the trust of multiple elderly people while convincing herself she was providing a service. Whether her motivations were criminal greed or genuine delusion, the result was the same: irreparable harm to vulnerable seniors and their families. I need to think about this, I said finally. But I want you to know, Bethany, that my decision won't be based on what's easiest for our family relationship. It will be based on what's right for all the people you helped harm. As we left the meeting, I realized that my decision about Bethany's fate would be informed by the same values that had guided my estate planning. Protection of vulnerable people had to take precedence over family loyalty when the two came into conflict. The will I'd signed weeks earlier was looking more prescient every day. I spent 3 days considering Bethany's settlement offer, weighing the desire for family peace against the responsibility I felt toward other victims. During that time, Detective Foster provided additional evidence that made my decision easier, though not less painful. Mrs. Caldwell, we've analyzed Bethany's phone records from the past 8 months. She was in regular contact with Derek about specific targets, including detailed text messages about your neighbor Mrs. Hamilton's schedule and possessions. Miss Hamilton was supposed to be their next target after you. The thought that my own neighbor might have suffered the same violation I'd experienced because of information provided by my daughter was the final straw. I called Jim Morrison and declined the settlement offer. I want Bethany to face the full consequences of her actions, I told him. Not because I want revenge, but because other elderly people deserve protection from this kind of systematic targeting. Are you certain, Margaret? This decision will likely mean Bethany serves significant jail time. I'm certain. She made her choices deliberately and repeatedly. Now she needs to face the results of those choices. The criminal trial began 6 weeks later. Derek had accepted a plea bargain, agreeing to testify against Bethany in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating, presenting evidence of the organized nature of their operation and Bethany's central role in identifying and researching targets. I testified on the second day, describing the systematic violation of my trust and the emotional impact of discovering that my own daughter had helped orchestrate my victimization. Speaking publicly about the betrayal was difficult, but I felt a responsibility to give voice to the experience of elder abuse. Mrs. Caldwell, the prosecutor asked, how did you feel when you discovered that your daughter had been providing information about your neighbors to Derek Hoffman? Heartbroken, I answered honestly. Not just because of what was done to me, but because I realized my daughter was capable of targeting other vulnerable people the same way she'd targeted me. That wasn't the person I thought I'd raised. During cross-examination, Bethany's attorney tried to portray me as a confused elderly woman who'd misunderstood her daughter's good intentions. The strategy backfired when he suggested that my age made me an unreliable witness. Mr. Watts, I responded firmly. I may be 72 years old, but I'm perfectly capable of understanding when someone has stolen from me and violated my trust. Age doesn't make theft acceptable, and it doesn't make family betrayal any less painful. The jury's reaction to that exchange was visible. Several members nodded in agreement, and the attorney quickly changed his approach. Derek's testimony was the most damning evidence against Bethany. He described in detail how she had suggested targeting elderly people in our neighborhood, provided him with intelligence about their habits and valuables, and helped plan the timing of thefts around medical procedures and family emergencies. Bethany told me that old people get confused about money and property, Derek testified. She said they often couldn't tell the difference between theft and helpful organizing, especially if they were isolated from family members who might notice changes. When Bethany took the stand in her own defense, her testimony revealed the depth of her self-deception. She continued to insist that she'd believed she was helping elderly people manage their possessions more effectively. "I genuinely thought we were providing a service," she said. "These people had so much stuff they couldn't use or appreciate anymore. I thought we were helping them transition to more practical living situations." The prosecutor's response was withering. "Miss Caldwell, did any of these elderly people ask for your help with their possessions?" "No, but Derek said they were too proud to ask directly." "Did you have any training in geriatric care, estate planning, or social services?" "No, but I could see they needed help." "Ms. Caldwell, isn't it true that you simply decided these elderly people weren't capable of managing their own affairs and took it upon themselves to override their autonomy?" Bethany's pause before answering spoke volumes. "I thought I was doing what was best for them." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: elder abuse, organized theft, conspiracy, and fraud. Bethany was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months contingent on making full restitution to all victims. I felt no satisfaction in the verdict, only a profound sadness that our family relationship had reached this point. But I also felt relief that other elderly people would be protected from similar targeting, at least temporarily. 3 months after the trial concluded, I was finally able to return to my house on Maple Street. The legal proceedings had required extensive renovation to undo the damage Derek and Bethany had caused. My recovered furniture looked strange in rooms that had been so thoroughly transformed, but gradually the house began to feel like home again. Harold Henderson had supervised much of the restoration work, refusing to accept payment, despite my insistence. "Margaret, you're our neighbor and our friend. This is what neighbors do for each other." Eleanor had organized a neighborhood welcome back gathering for my first evening home. As I sat in Robert's restored leather chair, surrounded by people who'd shown me more genuine care than my own daughter, I reflected on how much my understanding of family had changed. Jim Morrison visited the following week to discuss the final resolution of my legal affairs. All civil matters had been settled, with Bethany's assets seized to pay restitution to victims. The house was fully mine again, with new security measures installed and updated legal protections in place. "Margaret, there's something we should discuss," Jim said as our business meeting concluded. "Given everything that's happened, do you want to make any changes to your will?" I had been expecting this question and had given it considerable thought. "No changes, Jim. If anything, recent events have confirmed that my decisions were correct." "You're certain?" "Bethany will be eligible for parole in 18 months. People can change, especially after experiencing consequences for their actions." "Perhaps they can. But my will isn't about punishment or forgiveness. It's about ensuring my legacy goes to people and organizations that will use it responsibly and appreciate its value." Jim nodded. "The charitable trust structure we established will ensure your estate supports causes you cared about while providing Bethany with a modest income if she demonstrates genuine rehabilitation. It's a balanced approach that protects your intentions while leaving room for family reconciliation if that becomes appropriate." 6 months later, I received a letter from Bethany, in prison. She had been participating in counseling programs and claimed to finally understand the magnitude of what she'd done to me and other victims. Her letter was filled with apologies and promises to spend the rest of her life making amends. I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Whether Bethany's remorse was genuine or another manipulation, I no longer felt responsible for managing her emotional journey. My focus had shifted to rebuilding my own life and supporting other elder abuse survivors. I became involved with a local organization that helped seniors recover from financial exploitation, sharing my story at community education events and supporting other families dealing with similar betrayals. The work was emotionally challenging but meaningful, helping transform my painful experience into something that could protect others. Dorothy Pierce and I became close friends, bonding over our shared experience and mutual understanding of the complex grief involved in family betrayal. We started a support group for elder abuse survivors that met monthly at the community center, providing a safe space for people to process their experiences without judgment. "Margaret," Dorothy said during one of our group meetings, I've been thinking about forgiveness lately. Do you think we're obligated to forgive family members who hurt us this badly? It was a question I'd wrestled with extensively. I think forgiveness is something we do for ourselves, not for the people who hurt us. But forgiveness doesn't mean trusting someone again or pretending their actions didn't have consequences. Dr. Martinez, my counselor, had helped me understand that I could forgive Bethany for my own peace of mind, while still maintaining boundaries that protected me from future harm. The two weren't mutually exclusive. A year after the trial, I received notification that Bethany was applying for early parole. Her application included character references from prison counselors and a detailed rehabilitation plan. As a victim, I was invited to provide input on her parole consideration. I wrote a careful letter to the parole board, acknowledging Bethany's apparent progress while emphasizing the systematic nature of her crimes and the ongoing vulnerability of elderly people in our community. I supported her eventual release with appropriate supervision, but requested that contact restrictions remain in place until she could demonstrate sustained behavioral change through independent living and employment. Bethany was granted parole after serving 22 months, with conditions that included ongoing counseling, community service with elder abuse prevention organizations, and a no-contact order regarding me unless I specifically requested communication. I learned about her release through official channels, but made no effort to reach out. The door to reconciliation remained open, but it would require her to demonstrate genuine change through actions rather than words. 2 years after Bethany's release, Jim Morrison called with an unexpected update. "Margaret, I thought you should know that Bethany has been working as a victim advocate with the district attorney's office, helping prosecute elder abuse cases. She's apparently been quite effective at getting other perpetrators to confess by explaining the real impact of their crimes on families." The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter was now using her insider knowledge of elder abuse tactics to protect other seniors. Whether this represented genuine rehabilitation or another form of manipulation, I couldn't determine from a distance. On my 75th birthday, I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside was a simple message: "Happy birthday, Mom. I think about you every day and hope you're well. I understand why you can't trust me yet, but I want you to know that I'm working every day to become the daughter you deserve. Love, Bethany." I kept the card, but didn't respond. Perhaps someday there would be room in my life for a relationship with the person Bethany might become, but that would require years of consistent, trustworthy behavior that prioritized other people's welfare over her own convenience. For now, I was content with the life I'd rebuilt. My house was once again a peaceful refuge filled with memories of Robert and our life together. My days were occupied with meaningful volunteer work, supportive friendships, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing my legacy was properly protected. The will I'd signed in those anxious days before my surgery remained unchanged. When my time came, my estate would support the animal shelter where Robert and I had volunteered, fund scholarships for deserving students, and maintain the community garden that brought so much joy to our neighborhood. A trust would provide Bethany with basic support, but the bulk of my life's work would benefit people and organizations that had earned that privilege through demonstrated character and service. Sometimes I wondered if I'd been too harsh in my judgment of Bethany's actions, but then I would think about Dorothy Pierce's missing watches, or Mrs. Hamilton's gratitude that she'd been spared becoming Derek's next victim, or the other seniors in our support group who were still struggling to rebuild their sense of safety and trust. Protecting vulnerable people had to take precedence over family loyalty when the two came into conflict. That principle had guided my estate planning decisions, and it continued to guide my daily choices about how to spend my remaining years. I'd learned that real family wasn't just about shared DNA, it was about mutual respect, genuine care, and trustworthy behavior sustained over time. The Hendersons had shown me more family loyalty than my own daughter. Dorothy Pierce understood my heart better than the child I'd raised. As I sat in Robert's chair on quiet evenings, reading in the peaceful home we'd built together, I felt gratitude for the clarity that Bethany's betrayal had ultimately provided. The pain of her choices had been terrible, but it had also freed me to recognize and appreciate the authentic relationships in my life. My legacy was secure, my boundaries were clear, and my conscience was at peace. Whatever Bethany chose to do with the rest of her life, I had done everything possible to protect both myself and future victims from similar harm. The locks on my doors had been changed again, this time by my choice, for my protection, with keys held only by people who had earned my trust through consistent, respectful behavior. 3 years passed in this new rhythm of life. I celebrated my 76th birthday surrounded by my chosen family, the Hendersons, Dorothy Pierce, members of our support group and volunteers from the animal shelter. The gathering took place in my restored dining room, the same space that had once been Derek's motorcycle workshop. Now it held a table set with my grandmother's recovered china, hosting people who appreciated both the beauty of the pieces and the history they represented. During the celebration, Eleanor presented me with a scrapbook documenting the impact of our elder abuse survivor support group. Over 3 years, we had helped 47 seniors recover from financial exploitation, testified in 12 criminal cases, and successfully lobbied for stronger protective legislation at the state level. The work had given my experience with Bethany a broader purpose that extended far beyond our personal family drama. "Margaret," Dorothy said during her toast, "when we first met, we were both broken by betrayal. Look at what we've built from that brokenness." The scrapbook contained letters from people we'd helped, photos from community education events, and sheet paper clippings about policy changes our advocacy had influenced. One letter particularly moved me. From an 80-year-old man whose son had been stealing his Social Security checks, our support group had helped him find legal representation and emotional strength to prosecute the theft. "Mrs. Caldwell," he'd written, "your story gave me permission to put my own safety before my son's convenience. Thank you for showing me that protecting myself wasn't betraying my family. It was honoring the life I'd worked so hard to build." Reading testimonials like this reinforced my conviction that refusing Bethany's settlement offer had been the right choice. Individual justice mattered, but systemic change that protected other vulnerable people mattered more. That autumn, I received an unexpected visit from Sarah Chen, the elder law specialist who had helped with my case. She was researching a book about family financial abuse and wanted to interview survivors about their recovery experiences. "Margaret, your case has become somewhat famous in legal circles because of how comprehensively you protected yourself through estate planning. Most elder abuse victims never recover financially or emotionally from family betrayal. Your story demonstrates that prevention and swift legal action can make a significant difference." Sarah explained that my case was being studied in law schools as an example of effective estate planning for family protection. The will I'd signed weeks before my surgery, and the comprehensive legal strategy Jim Morrison had developed, were now template models for other attorneys handling similar situations. "Would you be willing to speak at legal conferences about your experience? There's tremendous value in having victims share their perspectives with attorneys who might not understand the emotional complexity of family financial abuse." I agreed, and over the following months I addressed bar association meetings, elder law seminars, and judicial education programs. Speaking to legal professionals was different from counseling abuse survivors. These audiences needed to understand not just the emotional damage of family betrayal, but the practical legal tools that could prevent and remedy such abuse. "The most important thing attorneys need to understand," I told a conference of estate planning lawyers in San Francisco, "is that elder abuse often begins years before anyone recognizes it as abuse. It starts with small boundary violations, gradual erosion of autonomy, and manipulation disguised as concern. By the time obvious theft occurs, the victim has usually been psychologically conditioned to doubt their own judgment." The legal community's interest in my story led to an unexpected opportunity. A documentary filmmaker named Marcus Rodriguez approached me about participating in a film about elder abuse and family financial exploitation. The project would follow several survivors through their recovery processes while examining the broader social and legal issues involved. "Mrs. Caldwell, your story illustrates how someone can maintain dignity and strength even when facing devastating family betrayal. That message could help other seniors recognize that they're not alone and that recovery is possible." Participating in the documentary required me to revisit painful memories, but it also provided a platform to reach seniors who might be experiencing similar situations. The film, titled When Family Becomes the Enemy, premiered at several film festivals and was eventually broadcast on public television. The documentary's impact surprised everyone involved. Viewer response was overwhelming, with hundreds of seniors contacting support organizations after seeing the film. Many had been enduring financial abuse from family members, but hadn't recognized their situations as criminal behavior worthy of legal intervention. One woman who contacted our support group after seeing the documentary had a story remarkably similar to mine. Her daughter-in-law had been gradually taking control of her finances under the guise of helping with bill paying, but was actually diverting funds to personal accounts. The woman had felt confused and guilty about questioning her son's wife, but the documentary helped her understand that financial exploitation was a crime regardless of family relationships. Seeing you speak so clearly about your daughter's actions gave me permission to acknowledge what was happening to me, she told our group during her first meeting. I thought I was being paranoid or ungrateful, but you showed me that protecting myself was not only acceptable, but necessary. Stories like hers validated the difficulty of my decision to pursue criminal charges against Bethany. Each person we helped represented potential future victims who were protected by our willingness to break the silence around family financial abuse. 5 years after Bethany's conviction, I received a formal request for contact through the probation department. She had completed all requirements of her parole, maintained steady employment with the district attorney's office, and wanted to request a supervised meeting to make direct amends for her actions. The request came with documentation of her work over the previous 3 years, case files showing her role in prosecuting 17 elder abuse cases, training materials she'd developed for law enforcement, and character references from victims who credited her advocacy with securing justice in their situations. Jim Morrison reviewed the request with me, noting that Bethany's professional work seemed genuine and impactful. Margaret, she's not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. She's specifically requesting an opportunity to make direct amends and demonstrate accountability for the harm she caused. The decision is entirely yours. I spent weeks considering the request. My life was full and peaceful without Bethany's presence, and I felt no need for closure or emotional resolution. But I also recognized that her victim advocacy work was helping other seniors in tangible ways, and perhaps a conversation could benefit her continued effectiveness in that role. I agreed to one supervised meeting at Jim Morrison's office, with the understanding that it would be focused on accountability rather than relationship repair. Bethany appeared significantly changed from the woman who had been sentenced 5 years earlier. She was thinner, more formally dressed, and carried herself with a professional bearing that was entirely new. Most notably, she maintained appropriate eye contact without the defensive or manipulative expressions I remembered from our previous encounters. "Mom, Mrs. Caldwell," she began carefully, "thank you for agreeing to see me. I want to start by acknowledging that I have no right to expect anything from you, including this conversation. I'm here because I believe I owe you a complete accounting of my actions and their impact." For the next hour, Bethany provided a detailed confession that went far beyond what had been presented at trial. She described the systematic way she had researched my neighbors, the specific techniques Derek had taught her for gaining elderly people's trust, and the financial pressures that had initially motivated her participation in the scheme. I told myself I was helping people, but that was a lie I created to avoid facing what I was really doing. I was targeting vulnerable seniors for financial exploitation because it was easier than getting a legitimate job and supporting myself responsibly. More importantly, she acknowledged the deeper violations that had preceded the criminal behavior. "I had been disrespecting your autonomy and decision-making capacity for years before Derek ever appeared. I saw your age as justification for overriding your choices about your own life and property. That attitude is what made me susceptible to Derek's criminal recruitment." Bethany's ability to articulate the psychological foundation of her crimes was more convincing than any emotional apology could have been. She understood not just what she had done, but why it was fundamentally wrong and how her thinking had been distorted. "Mrs. Caldwell, I don't expect forgiveness, And I'm not asking for a relationship. I'm asking if there's anything specific I can do to continue making amends beyond my professional work with other victims. I studied her face for signs of manipulation or performance, but found only genuine remorse and professional competence. This was not the same person who had dismissed my concerns as a tantrum or who had sold my husband's book collection for pocket money. Bethany, your work with the district attorney's office has already helped more people than any personal gesture could. Continue that work with integrity and honor the trust that other victims place in you. That's the most meaningful amends you can make. She nodded, tears beginning to form but maintaining her composure. I will, and I want you to know that everything I learned about the impact of family financial abuse came from watching what my actions did to you. Your strength in pursuing justice taught me more about right and wrong than any counseling program could have. The meeting concluded without emotional reconciliation or promises of future contact. We shook hands formally, two women who had learned different lessons from the same devastating experience. Driving home from Jim Morrison's office, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. The woman who had emerged from surgery to find her locks changed and her possessions stolen was not the same person who had just met professionally with her daughter to discuss accountability and victim advocacy. I had been transformed by betrayal into someone stronger, clearer about my values, and more committed to protecting vulnerable people. Bethany had been transformed by consequences into someone who understood the real impact of exploitation and was dedicating her career to preventing similar harm. We would never have a traditional mother-daughter relationship, but perhaps we had found something more valuable, mutual respect based on authentic behavior rather than biological obligation. That evening, I updated my will one final time, adding a provision that would increase Bethany's trust fund if she continued her victim advocacy work for at least 10 years. It wasn't forgiveness in the emotional sense, but it was recognition that people could change and that sustained good behavior deserved acknowledgement. The provision was structured to protect against manipulation. The funds would only be released based on objective employment records and victim impact statements, not on any reconciliation with me personally. My estate would support her continued rehabilitation while maintaining the protective structure that reflected our complicated history. As I signed the updated documents in Jim Morrison's office, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with family relationships and everything to do with personal integrity. My legacy would reflect my true values: protection for the vulnerable, support for genuine rehabilitation, and consequences for harmful behavior. The locks on my doors had been changed again, this time by my choice. For my protection, with keys held only by people who had earned my trust through consistent, respectful behavior. And I slept soundly every night, knowing that my final wishes would be honored by people who truly understood their value, while also acknowledging that even damaged people could sometimes find their way back to decency through sustained effort and authentic accountability. 7 years had passed since that terrifying day when I'd returned from surgery to find my life turned upside down. Now, at 79, I was preparing for what would likely be my final major life transition. My health remained good, but I was realistic about the practical challenges of maintaining a large house at my age. The decision to downsize wasn't driven by necessity but by choice. I wanted to make this transition while I could still enjoy it rather than waiting until circumstances forced my hand. Harold Henderson, now 85 himself, had helped me research senior living communities that offered independence with optional support services. Margaret, Eleanor said as we toured the Riverside Gardens community, "This feels like a place where you could continue your advocacy work while having access to services if you need them." Riverside Gardens was different from the stereotypical nursing home. It was designed as a true community, with independent apartments, shared spaces for activities and dining, and a wellness center that provided services ranging from basic health monitoring to physical therapy. Most appealing to me was their commitment to resident autonomy and their track record of supporting seniors who remained professionally active well into their 80s. The apartment I selected was smaller than my house, but perfectly suited to my needs. It had large windows overlooking gardens maintained by residents, built-in bookshelves where I could display Robert's restored book collection, and a kitchen adequate for the simple cooking I preferred. The community's emphasis on intellectual engagement and social purpose aligned perfectly with my desire to continue meaningful work. Planning the move required decisions about my house on Maple Street. The property had appreciated significantly since Robert and I had purchased it decades earlier, and selling it would provide substantial resources for both my own care and continued charitable giving. But the house held too many memories to sell to strangers without ensuring it would be respected and appreciated. Through our elder abuse support group, I learned about a nonprofit organization that purchased homes to convert into transitional housing for seniors recovering from financial exploitation. The Maple Street house would be perfect for their needs, large enough to accommodate several residents while maintaining the dignity and comfort necessary for emotional healing. Mrs. Caldwell, said Rebecca Torres, the nonprofit's director, this house would allow us to help 8 to 10 seniors Samlenius while they rebuild their lives after financial abuse. Your own experience with recovery in a supportive environment makes this donation particularly meaningful. The sale was structured as a charitable donation with lifetime use provisions, allowing me to live in the house for another 6 months, while preparations were made for its conversion. The arrangement provided me with significant tax advantages while ensuring the property would serve people who truly needed its shelter and security. During those final months in my family home, I hosted a series of gatherings that celebrated the house's history while preparing for its future purpose. Dorothy Pierce organized a reunion of our support group, bringing together people whose lives had been touched by our advocacy work over the years. Margaret, said Thomas Chen, the elderly man whose son had been stealing his Social Security checks, this house represents more than just your family's history. It's become a symbol of recovery and resistance for all of us who've survived family financial abuse. The evening was filled with stories of triumph over betrayal, legal victories that had secured justice for victims, and policy changes that had strengthened protections for vulnerable seniors. Seeing the positive impact that had grown from my own painful experience provided a sense of completion that purely personal healing could never have achieved. One unexpected guest at the reunion was Detective Amanda Foster, now promoted to lieutenant and heading the county's elder abuse task force. She brought news that our advocacy work had contributed to a 40% reduction in reported elder financial abuse cases over the past 5 years. Mrs. Caldwell, the educational programs you've supported and the victim services you've helped develop have fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches these cases. We're now catching abuse earlier and providing better support for families dealing with the aftermath. Lieutenant Foster also shared information about Derek Hoffman's continued imprisonment and the broader impact of his prosecution. The case had established important legal precedents about organized elder abuse that were being used by prosecutors across the country. Derek's conviction sent a clear message that targeting elderly people for systematic financial exploitation would result in serious consequences. We've seen a measurable deterrent effect, particularly among criminals who previously viewed seniors as easy targets. As I prepared to leave the house for the final time, I discovered items I'd forgotten in the basement storage area. Among them was a box of letters Robert had written to me during our courtship, a wedding album from our reception in this very living room, and photographs documenting decades of family celebrations and neighborhood gatherings. Looking through these mementos, I was struck by how completely my understanding of family and legacy had evolved. The young woman who had married Robert in this house had defined family through blood relationships and assumed that biological connections would naturally translate into loyalty and respect. The older woman preparing to leave understood that real family was built through consistent care, mutual respect, and shared values rather than genetic accident. My final act in the house was updating my will once more, this time adding provisions for the ongoing maintenance and operation of what would become the Margaret and Robert Caldwell Recovery House. The designation ensured that the property would always serve people rebuilding their lives after family financial exploitation. Jim Morrison handled the final legal arrangements with his usual thoroughness. Margaret, this estate plan has evolved into something remarkable. You've created a legacy that protects vulnerable people while acknowledging the possibility of redemption for those who genuinely change their behavior. The will's final structure reflected 7 years of careful consideration and accumulated wisdom. The bulk of my estate would support the recovery house, elder abuse prevention programs, and educational scholarships for students studying geriatric social work or elder law. Bethany's trust fund had been increased to reflect her sustained victim advocacy work, but remained structured to prevent misuse while encouraging continued service to vulnerable populations. Most importantly, Jim noted, you've created legal documents that tell a story about values and priorities rather than just distributing assets. Future generations will understand not just what you decided, but why those decisions reflected your core beliefs about justice and protection. Moving day arrived with unseasonably warm weather that made the transition feel like a new beginning rather than an ending. The Hendersons, now my oldest friends despite not being related by blood, supervised the packing while members of our support group handled the careful transport of my most precious possessions. Dorothy Pierce had organized a small ceremony for my first evening at Riverside Gardens. The community's main dining room was decorated with flowers from Eleanor's garden, and residents gathered to welcome their new neighbor with warmth and curiosity about my advocacy work. "Margaret," said Dr. Susan Walsh, Riverside Gardens director, "we're honored to have someone with your commitment to social justice joining our community. Several of our residents have expressed interest in learning about elder abuse prevention, and we'd love to support your continued work in this area." The transition was smoother than I'd expected. My apartment felt welcoming rather than confining. The community's social atmosphere provided stimulation without overwhelming demands, and the availability of support services offered security without compromising independence. Within weeks, I'd established a routine that balanced personal enjoyment with continued advocacy work. Mornings were devoted to reading, correspondence with other elder abuse organizations, and telephone consultations with attorneys handling similar cases. Afternoons included social activities with fellow residents, exercise in the wellness center, and work in the community garden that reminded me of my years tending Robert's roses. The most rewarding aspect of life at Riverside Gardens was mentoring other residents who had experienced various forms of exploitation or family conflict. The community attracted people who had made difficult decisions about their own safety and autonomy, and many found value in sharing their experiences with someone who understood the complexity of family betrayal. "Margaret," said Helen Rodriguez, a 74-year-old woman whose daughter had been forging checks from her bank account, "talking with you helped me realize that protecting myself wasn't selfish. I'd been so worried about hurting my daughter's feelings that I was allowing her to destroy my financial security." These conversations reinforced my conviction that speaking openly about family financial abuse served a purpose beyond personal healing. Each person who found courage to seek help potentially prevented years of exploitation while demonstrating to others that resistance was possible and appropriate. 9 months after moving to Riverside Gardens, I received news that the Margaret and Robert Caldwell Recovery House had welcomed its first residents. 3 women and 2 men, all survivors of family financial exploitation, were beginning the process of rebuilding their lives in the security of my former home. Rebecca Torres invited me to attend the house's dedication ceremony, which was held in the living room where Robert and I had celebrated our wedding reception 55 years earlier. Seeing the space filled with people who were healing from betrayal while surrounded by love and support felt like the perfect culmination of my journey from victim to advocate. "Mrs. Caldwell," said Maria Santos, one of the house's first residents, "knowing that this home belongs to someone who survived what we're surviving gives us hope that recovery is really possible. You've shown us that we can transform our pain into purpose." The ceremony included readings from letters written by people who had been helped by our advocacy programs over the years. Listening to their words, I understood that my decision to pursue justice against Bethany had created ripple effects that extended far beyond our personal family drama. As I sat in Robert's favorite chair, now placed in the recovery house's common room where multiple people could enjoy its comfort, I felt his presence in a way I hadn't experienced since his death. He would have been proud of what his beloved home was becoming, and the legacy we were creating together, even after his passing. That evening, back in my apartment at Riverside Gardens, I called Bethany for the first time since our formal meeting 3 years earlier. Her work with the district attorney's office had expanded to include training programs for law enforcement agencies across the state, and I wanted her to know about the recovery house and its connection to our family's story. "Mom," she said, her voice carefully professional but genuinely moved, "I can't think of a more appropriate way to honor Dad's memory and your strength. That house will help people heal from the same kind of harm I caused. It's a beautiful form of justice." Our conversation was brief and focused on the recovery house rather than our personal relationship, but it carried an emotional weight that surprised me. Bethany had truly become someone I could respect, even if trust remained limited and our interactions stayed formal. "I want you to know," she added before we hung up, "that every person I help through my work is also a form of amends to you. I'll never be able to undo the harm I caused, but I can spend the rest of my career preventing similar harm to other families." 6 months later, on my 80th birthday, I received a card from Bethany that included a photo of her speaking at a national conference on elder abuse prevention. She had been promoted to senior victim advocate and was now developing training materials used by prosecutors throughout the country. The card's message was simple but meaningful. "Happy birthday, Mom. Thank you for showing me that justice and redemption can coexist when people are willing to do the hard work of change. Your courage in holding me accountable saved more lives than just your own." I kept the card in my desk drawer next to Robert's final letter to me, written shortly before his death. In it, he had expressed hope that Bethany would eventually find her way to becoming a person worthy of the love we had invested in raising her. "My dearest Margaret," his letter had concluded, "whatever happens with our daughter, know that you've given her every opportunity to choose wisely. If she makes poor choices, that reflects her character, not your parenting. Trust your judgment, protect yourself, and remember that real love sometimes requires difficult boundaries." Robert's wisdom had guided my decisions throughout the crisis with Bethany and continued to inform my choices about legacy and family relationships. He had understood that love without accountability was not truly loving, and that protecting vulnerable people sometimes required disappointing those who expected unlimited tolerance for harmful behavior. As I celebrated my 80th birthday surrounded by friends at Riverside Gardens, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me to this point. The woman who had awakened from surgery to find her locks changed could never have imagined the life of purpose and influence that would grow from that moment of betrayal. The pain of Bethany's actions had been real and lasting, but it had also catalyzed growth, advocacy work, and connections with remarkable people who had transformed personal suffering into social change. My legacy would extend far beyond the money in my bank accounts to include the policies, programs, and protections that would shield future generations of seniors from family financial exploitation. Looking around the dining room at friends who had chosen to share their lives with me based on affection and respect rather than biological obligation, I understood that I had found the family I truly deserved. These were people who valued my wisdom, respected my autonomy, and supported my continued growth even as my body aged. The locks on my doors had been changed again, this time by my choice, for my protection, with keys held only by people who had earned my trust through consistent, respectful behavior. But more importantly, I had learned to change the locks on my heart, opening them only to those who demonstrated through sustained action that they were worthy of the love and resources I had to offer. My will remains a testament to these hard-won lessons about family, trust, and the responsibility we owe to vulnerable people in our communities. When my time came, my legacy would reflect values chosen through experience rather than obligation, supporting people and causes that had proven their worth through service rather than genetics. And I slept soundly every night, knowing that my final wishes would be honored by people who truly understood their value, while also acknowledging that even damaged people could sometimes find their way back to decency through sustained effort and authentic accountability. The story that had begun with betrayal had become a testament to the possibility of justice, healing, and the creation of a chosen family based on love that was both wise and protective. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.